Hello again. We are with Professor Shi Yan, and we are talking to him a little bit about his background today. So, Professor Yan, can you explain what do you study?
Sure. So my study mostly focuses around courts, American courts today. And one major branch of my research is plea bargaining, about why people plead to certain offers or reject certain pleas, as well as some of the key parameters of pleas, like say on average, how much discount people get by pleading guilty compared with going to trial. And another line of my research looks at the role of prior criminal careers and prior criminal records on courts processing and case outcomes. And alongside with that, I also do some studies related specifically to the criminal career properties and see how individuals develop and desist from committing crimes.
So that's a number of different things. What brought you to this? What do you find most interesting about these research questions?
So it all went back to my background and earlier training when I was in the law school, pursuing a law degree back in Peking University, China. And many of my classmates ended up becoming lawyers. But for me, what I was more enthusiastic about is to look at the overall pattern and at a macro level, how things work. So instead of a specific case and specific decision, on average or on the overall scale, how is the court system working or not working to a certain extent? And what are some of the issues that are surrounding the actual ways that prosecutors and judges and other courtroom decision makers work in general?
So you have a new paper out right now that is going to get some attention. What's the most significant part of the findings?
So in plain language, even though it may look like sounds like common sense, but what that says is people are attentive to what they were exposed to. In that study, what we did was that we used a vignette simulation, a computerized simulation, to look at whether disclosure about COVID-19 exposure is related to people's plea decisions. Because in these days, prisons and jails are hotspots of COVID outbreaks. And for detained inmates, there is a higher motivation, a stronger motivation for them to plead guilty in order to be immediately released. And previous studies have found that even before the pandemic, defendants who are detained are more likely to plead guilty. And we found this again, and we also found this tendency for both innocent and guilty defendants. One of the issues here is that the vast majority of defendants in the United States plead guilty, and that's the majority of disposition mode for the majority of criminal cases. However, many of them were indeed guilty of something, but some of them were not responsible for what they're charged with. And what we found here is that at the same time, potential concerns on COVID-19 increased both guilty and innocent defendants pleading guilty. And also the innocent defendants are more concerned about COVID-19 as a factor than the guilty ones.
So it sounds like what you're saying is that innocent people may very well plead guilty to crimes they didn't commit because they want to stay out of jail during COVID. That sounds pretty significant.
Yes, it does. And there has been a literature on that made by many researchers before me from a variety of disciplines. But why this is happening, one of the most common factor that's behind this is the disparity between the sentence at plea and the sentence at trial. So naturally, people get a discount or a reduced harshness in their sentence by pleading guilty. However, once the difference becomes too large, then in some of the earlier studies, it's becoming a trial penalty that's essentially penalizing people for insisting onto their fundamental right to jury trials. And to avoid that, it then becomes more appealing for defendants to plead guilty. And as the gap between trial and plea sentences gets larger, more defendants and more a larger number of innocent defendants are also going to be susceptible to this stimulus.
So I'm curious, what brings you to work as a professor? What do you like about this job?
So it has two parts. On one part is research, and that is to basically satisfy the curiosity of myself as well as my collaborators and people who collaborate around me. Sometimes they're researchers, sometimes they are practitioners. But the other part about being a professor is that there is a higher level of freedom to decide who to collaborate with. Because many of my work today are highly interdisciplinary, and I am actually collaborating with a very good group of researchers from several disciplines. Like I have collaborators who are psychologists, who are legal scholars, and economists and computer scientists. And that exchange of views, as well as the brainstorming part of the ideas, is just fascinating, and that is the most desirable part in my career so far.
Well, compared to people like me, you are still a young man, but compared to our students, my guess is that you have some life experience that they are always eager to hear. What's the best advice you've gotten, or what's the best advice you would give students?
So that's the advice that I figured out, actually, instead of having someone told me, but I figured out in graduate school, is that setbacks and failures in the inherent part of the job. When I was in graduate school, actually, my first publication was my third project while in graduate school, and then the earlier ones either did not get written or did not get into journal articles. And there are also many times when I am really frustrated at my data analysis, as well as sometimes the progress of my manuscript, etc. And that is an inherent part of this exercise. Basically, the only people who don't run into problems in their data analysis is those who never analyze anything. And the only people who don't get rejections or hear critique about their studies is one who never submits to journals and to attempt. So attempting is very important. And it is part of the game. Does not necessarily mean any much about the quality of you as a researcher as well your work. Sometimes it's just fitting issues, and have faith in yourself. That's the most important part.
That's great advice. So I know that you are a very talented researcher, but what's your secret skill besides being an academic? What do you do better than other people?
So I would not say I do that better at any people, but one of the biggest hobbies I have in my daily life is cooking. And especially, I'm actually highly influenced by the food that I got exposed to in America in my past decades having here. And a lot of these I would classify them as the new American style of cuisine. It's lively and it's integrative. It incorporates the parts from many parts of the world. And it's just like my research, that is a synthesis of many different things. And that is what I like most about.
Well, that actually sounds delicious. I look forward to the opportunity to join you at some point. But for now, thank you very much for spending time with us today. Everyone, that was Assistant Professor Shi Yan from the School of Criminology and Criminal Justice. Thanks.
Thank you, John.